The rain drummed against the coffee shop window like fingers tapping out a secret message. And Sarah Chum thought she understood what it was trying to say, run. But she stayed frozen in her seat, watching the steam rise from her untouched latte, while her heart hammered against her ribs. Because across the crowded cafe, through the maze of small tables and animated conversations, sat the one person she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Michael Reynolds looked older. Not in a bad way, the kind of older that made her stomach flip in ways she'd forgotten were possible. His dark hair was shorter now, more professional, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But when he laughed at something his companion said, throwing his head back in that familiar gesture, Sarah felt the carefully constructed walls around her heart begin to crumble. She should leave. She should gather her things, slip out the back door and pretend this moment had never happened. But instead she found herself studying him, memorizing the way his shoulders moved under his navy sweater, the way his hands gestured as he spoke. She'd forgotten how animated he became when he was passionate about something, how his entire face would light up. The woman sitting across from him was beautiful blonde, polished, laughing at all the right moments. Sarah's chest tightened. Of course there was someone else. Of course there was. Sarah? Sarah Chun. The voice came from directly beside her table, and Sarah looked up to find Emma Rodriguez, her old college roommate, standing there with a surprised smile and a baby carrier. Emma! Sarah stood quickly, grateful for the distraction, though her eyes kept drifting back to Michael's table. I didn't know you were back in town. Just moved back last month, Emma said, settling into the chair across from her. David got transferred, and honestly, I miss Seattle. How are you? You look stressed. Sarah forced a smile. Just work stuff, nothing major. She gestured to the sleeping baby. And who's this little one? This is Lily, Emma said, her voice soft with maternal pride. She's 4 months old now. Can you believe it? Me, a mum. She's beautiful, Sarah said, and meant it. But even as she cooed over the baby, her awareness of Michael's presence in the cafe was like a physical weight. She could feel him there, could almost hear his voice over the ambient noise, and it was driving her crazy. Sarah, Emma said gently. Are you okay? You seem distracted. Sarah's eyes flicked involuntarily toward Michael's table, and Emma followed her gaze. Her eyebrows rose. Oh, Emma said, understanding immediately. Oh, Sarah, is that Michael? Sarah confirmed quietly. Yeah, Emma knew the story. She'd been there for the aftermath. Had held Sarah while she cried, had helped her pick up the pieces when everything fell apart. She'd also been the one to tell Sarah that sometimes love wasn't enough, that sometimes timing was everything, and that sometimes you had to let go even when it felt impossible. Have you talked to him? Emma asked. No. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I can't. I wouldn't even know what to say. Maybe you don't have to say anything complicated, Emma suggested. Maybe just hello. But Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. I can't just say hello, not to him. Not after everything. Emma reached across the table and squeezed her hand. What happened between you two wasn't anyone's fault, Sarah. You both made choices based on what you thought was right at the time. But what if we were wrong? The words tumbled out before Sarah could stop them. What if we were both just scared and stupid, and we threw away something that could have been? Sarah. The voice came from behind her, and Sarah's entire body went rigid. She knew that voice. She'd heard it in her dreams, in her memories, in the quiet moments when she let herself remember what it felt like to be truly, completely loved. She turned slowly, and there he was. Michael Reynolds, standing 3 feet away, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The woman he'd been sitting with was nowhere to be seen. Hi, he said, and his voice was softer than she remembered, uncertain in a way that made her heart ache. Hi, she managed to say back. Emma cleared her throat. I should probably get going, she said, standing up with the baby carrier. Lily's going to be hungry soon. She squeezed Sarah's shoulder. Call me later, okay? And then she was gone, leaving Sarah and Michael standing there in the middle of the busy cafe, staring at each other like they were the only two people in the world. Can I sit? Michael asked, gesturing to Emma's empty chair. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. He settled across from her, and she was struck by how familiar and foreign he seemed all at once. The same, but different. Changed by time and experience and all the things that had happened since they'd last spoken. You look good, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her skin tingle. Really good. So do you, she replied, and immediately felt foolish for it. They were dancing around each other, being polite and careful, when what she wanted to do was reach across the table and touch his face, to make sure he was really there. I heard you got the promotion, he said. Creative director at Morrison and Associates. That's amazing, Sarah. I always knew you'd do something incredible. She stared at him. How did you? I might have kept tabs on you, he admitted, and there was a flush of color on his cheeks that made him look younger. I know it's probably weird, but I wanted to know you were okay. That you were happy. Are you? She asked before she could stop herself. Happy? He was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I thought I was, he said finally. I convinced myself I was. But seeing you here, now, ... He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I think I've been lying to myself for 3 years. The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Sarah felt her heart racing, felt the familiar pull of him that had never really gone away, no matter how hard she tried to forget. Michael, she said, and his name tasted like coming home and breaking apart all at once. I know, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know we can't just pick up where we left off. But Sarah, I need you to know that letting you go was the biggest mistake I ever made. The rain outside had stopped, but Sarah barely noticed. The world had narrowed to this table, this moment, this man who had once been everything to her and who was now looking at her like she still could be. The woman you were with, she said, hating herself for asking but needing to know. A colleague, he said. Just a colleague. There's no one else, Sarah. There hasn't been anyone else who mattered since you. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. This is crazy. We're both different people now. We have different lives. Different. Do we? He interrupted. Because, sitting here with you, I feel exactly the same as I did 3 years ago. Terrified and exhilarated and completely, utterly in love. The words hit her like a physical blow. In love. Present tense. Not past. Not something that used to be. Something that was right here, right now. Michael, don't, she whispered. Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? Don't admit that I think about you every day. Don't say that I've spent 3 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for us instead of walking away. His voice was getting louder, more intense, and people at nearby tables were starting to look. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, like her heart was on display for everyone to see. We tried, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. We tried, and it didn't work. We were kids, he said. We were scared kids who thought we had to choose between love and our dreams. But what if we don't have to choose? What if we can have both? Sarah looked at him, really looked at him and saw the man he'd become. Successful, confident, but still vulnerable when it came to her. Still the person who could make her laugh until her sides hurt. Who could talk for hours about art and books and life. Who knew exactly how she liked her coffee, and that she always cried during movie trailers. "I'm not the same person I was," she said. "Neither am I," he replied. "But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we're finally ready for this. Maybe we're finally ready for each other." The cafe around them buzzed with life couples on dates, friends, catching up, students studying. But Sarah felt suspended in time, caught between the past and the possibility of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "I can't do this again," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "I can't go through losing you again." "Then don't lose me," he said simply. "Stay." It was the same word he'd whispered to her 3 years ago, the night before he was supposed to leave for London. The night she'd told him to go. Told him she wouldn't wait. Told him she didn't want to hold him back. The night that had changed everything. "I don't know how," she admitted. "We figure it out together," he said. "Like we should have done the first time." She wanted to say yes. Every cell in her body was screaming yes. But the fear was there too, cold and sharp, reminding her of all the ways love could go wrong. "I need time," she said finally. He nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "How much time?" "I don't know. I just ... I need to think." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. "This is my number," he said, sliding it across the table. "My personal number. When you're ready, if you're ready, call me." She took the card, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw him feel it too. "I'm staying at the Fairmont," he said. "Room 1247. I'm here until Sunday." He paused. "Sarah, please don't wait 3 years to call." He stood up, and for a moment she thought he was going to lean down and kiss her forehead like he used to. Instead, he just looked at her, his eyes full of longing and hope and barely contained emotion. "I love you," he said quietly. "I never stopped loving you. I just wanted you to know that." And then he was gone, weaving through the crowded cafe and out into the Seattle afternoon, leaving Sarah sitting alone with her cold coffee and a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She sat there for a long time, turning the card over in her hands, reading the words he'd written on the back in his familiar handwriting. "Some things are worth fighting for." We were worth fighting for. The barista came by to ask if she wanted a fresh coffee, and Sarah realized she'd been sitting there for over an hour, lost in thought. She packed up her things mechanically, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears and the memory of Michael's voice saying he loved her. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city smelled clean and new. Sarah walked the familiar streets toward her apartment, but her feet felt like they were carrying her through a dream. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. The world had tilted on its axis, and she wasn't sure which way was up anymore. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How did it go? Are you okay?" Sarah stared at the message, then typed back, "I don't know. Call you later." She climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, her space looked exactly as she'd left it that morning, organized, peaceful, perfectly controlled. But she felt like a stranger in her own life, like she'd been sleepwalking for 3 years and had just woken up. She sat on her couch, still holding Michael's card, and let herself remember. They'd met in college, in an art history class neither of them had wanted to take. Sarah had been studying graphic design. Michael had been pre-law, and they'd both been there to fulfill a requirement. But from the moment they'd been paired for a project on Renaissance art, something had sparked between them that neither of them could ignore. He'd been funny and smart and passionate about everything he did. She'd been driven and creative and determined to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Together, they'd been unstoppable, complementing each other in ways that made them both better. They dated all through college, making plans for the future, talking about marriage and careers, and the life they'd build together. But then graduation had come, and with it, choices. Michael had been accepted to law school in London. Opportunity too good to pass up. Sarah had been offered her dream job at a prestigious design firm in Seattle. They tried to figure out a way to make it work. Long distance, alternating visits, one of them giving up their opportunity to follow the other. But every solution had felt like a compromise, like one of them would always be sacrificing their dreams for the other. The night before Michael was supposed to leave, they'd had the fight that ended everything. She'd told him to go, told him she wouldn't wait, told him she didn't want to hold him back from his dreams. He'd said he would stay if she asked him to. But she'd seen the conflict in his eyes, the way part of him was already gone dot, so she'd let him go. She'd convinced herself it was the right thing to do, the mature thing to do. They were young. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They'd both find love again. But they hadn't. At least she hadn't. She'd thrown herself into her work, built a successful career, dated other people, told herself she was happy. But no one had ever made her feel the way Michael had. No one had ever understood her the way he did. And now he was back, and he was telling her he'd made a mistake, that he'd never stopped loving her, that maybe they could try again. But what if they failed again? What if they hurt each other again? What if love still wasn't enough? Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. It was Emma. "Okay, spill," Emma said without preamble. "I've been worried about you all afternoon." Sarah found herself telling Emma everything, the conversation, the business card, the way Michael had looked at her, the way he'd said he loved her. Emma listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and understanding. "So what are you going to do?" Emma asked when Sarah finished. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I'm scared, Emma. I'm so scared of getting hurt again." "But you're already hurt," Emma said gently. "You've been hurt for 3 years. Maybe it's time to take a chance on not being hurt anymore. What if it doesn't work out? What if it does?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." "You're the bravest person I know," Emma said. "You left everything you knew to chase your dreams. You built a career from nothing. You survived losing the love of your life and found a way to keep going. If that's not brave, I don't know what is." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, thinking about bravery and fear and the thin line between them. She thought about Michael, alone in his hotel room, waiting for her to call. She thought about all the what-ifs and might-have-beens that had haunted her for 3 years. She thought about the woman she'd been at 22, so sure that love had to be perfect or it wasn't worth fighting for. And she thought about the woman she was now, who understood that love was messier and more complicated than she'd ever imagined, but also more precious. The business card was still in her hands, the edges soft from her nervous touching. She read his words again. "Some things are worth fighting for." We were worth fighting for. Were they? Were they worth the risk of heartbreak? Worth the uncertainty? Worth the possibility that they might hurt each other again? Or were they worth the possibility that they might not, that they might finally get it right this time? Sarah stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Michael was waiting. Somewhere out there, a future. Was waiting, maybe a future with him. Maybe a future without him. But a future nonetheless. She took a deep breath and picked up her phone. The number rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, Sarah. His voice was hopeful and uncertain, and everything she remembered. For a moment, she couldn't speak. "Sarah, are you there?" "I'm here," she managed to say. "I was hoping you'd call. I was hoping I'd be brave enough to call." There was silence on the other end, and she could picture him smiling the way he used to when she said something that surprised him. "So," he said finally, "are you? Am I what?" "Brave enough." She closed her eyes, thinking about Emma's words, about the woman she'd become, about all the chances she'd taken, and all the ones she'd missed. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm willing to find out. Does that mean?" "It means I'm downstairs in the lobby of the Fairmont," she said, and heard his sharp intake of breath. "It means I got tired of being afraid. It means I think you might be right, maybe we are worth fighting for." There was a long pause, and then she heard movement, the sound of him getting up, walking. "Room 1247, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I'll be waiting. Michael?" "Yeah. Don't go anywhere, okay? Don't leave again." "Never," he said, and she believed him. "I'm not going anywhere without you this time." She hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the lobby mirror. Her hair was a mess from the rain, her makeup was smudged, and she was wearing the same clothes she'd thrown on that morning. But her eyes were brighter than they'd been in years, alive with possibility. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like the longest of her life. Her hands were shaking as she knocked on the door to room 1247, and when it opened, there he was, looking at her like she was a miracle. "Hi," he said, and she could see that he was shaking too. "Hi," she replied. For a moment they just stood there, looking at each other, both of them afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. Then Michael stepped aside, and Sarah walked into the room. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she knew that whatever happened next, they were finally ready for it. They were finally ready for each other. "I can't promise this will be easy," she said, turning to face him. "I don't want easy," he replied, moving closer. "I want you. I want us. I want to figure it out together this time." "Together," she repeated, and the word felt like a promise. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize she'd shed. "I love you, Sarah Chen. I've loved you for 7 years, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." She leaned into his touch, feeling the walls around her heart finally crumble completely. "I love you too," she whispered. "I never stopped loving you." And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back. And it was like coming home after a long journey. It was like finding the missing piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," he said, pulling her closer, "we figure it out. We talk about what we want, what we need, how we can make this work. We be honest about our fears and our dreams and everything in between. And if we can't figure it out, then we keep trying until we can," he said simply. "Because you're right, we are worth fighting for. We always were." Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Okay," she said. "Let's fight for us." "Let's fight for us," he agreed. And as the Seattle night settled around them, Sarah knew that this time they were going to win. The rain had stopped, the city was quiet, and 2 people who had spent 3 years apart were finally ready to build something together. It wouldn't be perfect, love never was, but it would be real, and it would be theirs. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything.